We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. It's Monday, March 30th, 2026. And today we're going to talk about Ice Barbie leaving a trail of mess and discomfort in her wake at the Department of Homeland Security, a United States Secret Service agent accidentally shooting himself. The FBI director suffered a hack at the hands of the Iranians, or maybe somebody else. Also, some corrupt judges are targeting Donald Trump, but he's too busy making his mark on our currency. Military personnel are gambling at war, and AI could be the new insider threat. So let's get after it. Nobody really likes a messy situation. I mean, there's some really weird people that enjoy the chaos and the madness, but by and large, in my experience, we all kind of like things to be relatively neat and tidy. Not OCD. You're not the person that's on your hands and your knees with a set of scissors cutting the carpet fibers to make sure that they're all the exact same length. But I'm talking about like just general stuff. How many times you come into your workplace and the desk is just in disarray and you just can't focus on what you have to do until things get a little bit tidied up. But if you get preoccupied with doing that, you could miss something big. So there's definitely a balance between the two, all things in moderation. I'm thinking about how the default when you're in a chaotic situation is to sort of revert to wanting some modicum of order and trying to restore something around you. Like the worst possible situation would be like September 11th. And there are these stories about people going code black when the airliners hit the towers, and as opposed to just running down the stairs and evacuating, people were going back to their desk and tidying up and powering down their computer because they didn't want to come back into a messy situation tomorrow. And they figured, all right, this is just the way I'm going to do things, because nobody likes any disorder, right? We want to have something relatively calm. Kind of dealing with it a little bit right now in the Friend household. Madam Friend, she had to go out of town for a couple of days. So it's me and a couple of boys, and they know we are not leaving a mess. We just can't seem to function in that situation. And we certainly don't want Madam Friend to come back to a mess, because that wouldn't be good for anybody. But what I want to get to today with the topics that I have is there's issues with a mess, but there's something afoot that could be far worse. So, as opposed to focusing on powering down our computers, maybe we should evacuate the burning building. Now, the first one I'm going to get to is from the Washington Examiner, and it pertains, and I've got a couple pieces here from them, to the former Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, one Kristi Noem, Ice Barbie. Headline here reads, "Glamour shots of Noem and phones in Faraday bags. Mullen takes on a messy Department of Homeland Security." So Mark Wayne Mullen will take over the Department of Homeland Security. He's the new Secretary of DHS. And according to the piece, he's going to quickly have to remake the DHS's approach to interior immigration enforcement, stabilizing, tanking public support for deportations, and shift public messaging away from meme-driven combative posts. He's also going to have to, I guess, take back some of the social media accounts, actually. I think Greg Bavino on his way out the door seized control of some of the social media accounts that Department of Homeland Security had, and he's on there posting mean stuff and responding directly to comments. So that's a whole very juvenile, childish thing that's probably beneath the office that he held, but it is a reality of the situation. Now, the crisis that is here. They have to restore public image. They have to stop the memeing. And I do have an example of one of the memes that was put out there, which I don't know. It's maybe inartful, distasteful, but is it really the emergency? Is it really the burning building? I think this is from the DHS's Instagram. And for those who happen to be listening, I'll have to describe it. It's a picture of a beach, beautiful, looks like a Florida beach, actually, the land of milk and honey. And it says, America after 100 million deportations. Look at this very serene, calm, peaceful, beautiful situation. And that's considered to be ugly. We can't have that. Mark Wayne Mullen has to come in and corrective action. Okay. Do you want to have a certain level of professionalism within a law enforcement agency like Department of Homeland Security has? Some of its arms actually are. Yeah, yeah. But is that the emergency? Or is the emergency that we actually have to debate whether or not we have to refigure our deportation efforts because it's giving people too much of a bad case of the feels? That's what the Washington Examiner points out here. Washington Examiner says that Mark Wayne Mullen has a Herculean task in front of him of restoring the public image of the department rather than fulfilling on its mandate and its mission set that is in line with our Constitution and with our laws and what the American people actually voted for when they sent the Trump administration back for round two. And that was mass deportations. The two biggest issues in the election of 2024. And there were lots of issues. There were some things in there that were really important to me that might necessarily have been really important to you. But by and large, the Venn diagram, Kamala Harris style, overlapped on two overarching issues: inflation and illegal immigration. Couldn't tell you what's one and what's two, but we'll just call them 1 and 1A. Now, the Department of Homeland Security has a charge of ejecting 10, 20, 50 million illegal aliens from the country. That's their charge. That's the burning building. The memes that were posted in the past hardly rise to that level. That is powering down your computer after an airliner has put a gaping hole that is rapidly catching on fire with jet engine fuel into the side of a skyscraper. Now, there were some other things, I guess, that this piece brought out about how bad things were during Kristi Noem's tenure. And we've talked about how she and Corey Lewandowski, or her paramour, her extramarital affair guy that she's not even trying to beat the allegations on anymore. They were sort of seizing control. They were trying to force people out there. Mullins is going to have to do some backfilling of leadership positions because apparently Noem and Lewandowski not only tried to push people out, they refused to promote other people who were experienced in this area. And I'm of two minds with that. I mean, do you want entrenched bureaucrats who have been there and they were part of the problem? No. So that might be actually a meritorious movement on behalf of Kristi Noem, and that pains me to say it. Or it might be something like she didn't care about institutional knowledge, which you actually do need to have if you're going to take on this task of trying to eject 30, 40, 50 million illegal aliens from the country. And then there were some more petty things, but they're still very important. I guess Kristi Noem said that all expenditures over $100,000 that came from her department had to go through her. Again, could she be trying to focus down on being fiscally conservative? Well, the woman essentially laundered over $200 million to her friends, so hardly she could be accused of being fiscally conservative. She's rather corrupt, but maybe that was sort of the intention. But as a result of that mandate and the oogles of money the Department of Homeland Security actually has access to, in excess of $300 billion, there's now a backlog of over 1,000 items that have to be approved of for the agency to actually purchase or go forth and expend its funds on. So that was an unnecessary burden. She couldn't find somebody else to delegate that to. I guess not. She was very busy taking photographs of herself, which were posted, according to the Washington Examiner. And the last piece I'll get to here, I'll just throw this back up there. So if you're the Secretary of Homeland Security, you have an office in every single agency that falls underneath your umbrella organization. So under DHS, you have ICE and Customs and Border Protection, and you have Homeland Security investigations and Coast Guard, And I think you have CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, all these different sub agencies. And she is entitled to an office in all of their various places. And apparently, when she took the job, they immediately took down all of the photographs that were on the walls in her specific area of those buildings and replaced the pictures of the border patrol guys riding horses and scooping up illegal aliens to just pictures of her. So Mark Wayne Mullen is going to have to restore a little bit of trust from the rank and file and leadership. So work's going to be cut out for him in that regard. Now, one of the other agencies that's within Department of Homeland Security that will fall underneath the purview of Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen is the United States Secret Service. And they had something happen recently, a negligent discharge. So from CBS News, Secret Service agent assigned to Jill Biden accidentally shoots himself at the Philadelphia International Airport. We don't know that much yet, but local police had to come in and do a preliminary report. Said the agent accidentally fired his gun while in an unmarked Chevy SUV. The former First Lady of the United States, the necromancer in chief, one Dr. Jill Biden. She wasn't actually there. She was maybe in the airport. She just wasn't in the vehicle. And I saw another report. I've not been able to verify it, that the guy was trying to get a phone that he dropped and he somehow pulled out his gun and shot himself. I don't know the details yet. I guess that'll have to be fleshed out during some comprehensive investigation, I'm sure. But what's the messy situation? Well, his leg is very messy. He had to go to the hospital. He's lucky he didn't kill himself. He could nick a femoral artery and bleed out within a couple of minutes, right? But I think the larger, messier situation is just the state of the United States Secret Service. We're on the heels of a couple weeks ago, they allowed an intruder into Mar-a-Lago. And that doesn't say anything of the 2 assassination attempts of Donald Trump that we had in the last year and a half. One of them successful, headshot taken. We had Thomas Matthew Crooks, who got onto the slightly sloped roof and fired multiple shots at a relatively close distance, one striking Donald Trump in the head. This is the myth of competence. This is the gaping hole in the side of the skyscraper, right? I mean, we're just allowing people to matriculate through the training, which to be a Secret Service agent, it's about half the length that you would need to be a licensed barber in America. Now, it's not an apples to apples comparison. You're supposed to be taking on a lot of stuff. You're supposed to have a background that supports your hiring into this austere, esteemed agency with this long track record of success and history. Because if you wanted to be truthful, if the Secret Service is doing its job, you don't hear about it. And most of the time, we don't hear about it. So we have to presume that they are doing their job. But really, is the threat that bad? Is the threat maybe getting a little bit enhanced now and they're being tested and they're just not up to the task? Certainly, it doesn't help when you've got your members shooting themselves in the leg. And we were told that everything was awesome now, right? We're in Trump administration part 2. We're back. We're based. He's going to restore America to a golden age. Does that not include the United States Secret Service? Now, what about other elements of Department of Homeland Security, which have gone 2 paychecks without being paid by the United States Treasury? So a headline from CBS News. Trump says he'll order DHS to start paying TSA officers as shutdown drags on. This is the personnel at the Transportation Security Administration being held hostage, used as leverage as our elected betters in Congress try to negotiate a reopening of the Department of Homeland Security, which funding lapsed for partially. The deportation aspect of Department of Homeland Security is fully funded by the One Big Beautiful Bill, where the Trump administration and Congress work together to steal, tax trillion plus dollars from the American people in order to spend it. But one of the few elements of the One Big Beautiful Bill that was good was funding deportation efforts. But we're not seeing the deportations. The funding is there. So from the CBS News piece, almost 500 TSA officers have quit because they didn't get paid. They also have 10% of officers who are just doing the blue flu and not coming in. Some of the airports up to 40%, 4 in 10 TSA workers are just not coming to work because they're saying like, hey, you're not paying me. I'm not coming to work. I'm pretty sure we passed an amendment in this country that says that you cannot have indentured servitude. You can't force me to work without being paid. I understand that sentiment. It's a sticky, messy situation, right? Because we have security matters here. Allegedly involved in a kinetic operation, not definitely a war overseas. There is somehow a threat from Iran. It was imminent that necessitate us getting involved over there. So, how does creating these log jams within security lines at airports help the situation? Now, there's the messy situation and really what is the five alarm fire. The messy situation is we haven't hashed out the funding, and this sort of thing goes on way too often where the politicians just kind of like throw things at each other and then go on TV and fundraise, and eventually at the end they just sign on to something that spends a lot of our money and doesn't necessarily help, or doesn't ever really help us at all as the citizens. But this is just the game that gets played. And they're dragging this out to try to make a lot of drama about it and try to use the personnel as leverage. But the bigger alarm, the bigger problem that's not being addressed, there's several of them. One, the security. Is there an actual security threat? I mean, if we have half almost of the TSA guys not showing up to work, are the remaining folks gonna be able to catch the security threats? Can they catch the security risks to begin with? Well, no, no. We've had red teams go through 95% of the time they don't get caught. So they're hardly proficient professionals that work there. But if there is a gigantic enhanced risk, as we're seeing reported constantly because we're now involved in the Middle East in a kinetic fashion, are we not making the situation far worse? Because if there's a 3-hour logjam at LaGuardia Airport, or in Washington, D.C., or in Atlanta, or more likely, all three at the same time, what's stopping an evildoer from detonating a suicide vest in all three of those locations simultaneously and having it be worse as far as body count goes than September 11th? What's stopping that? You've created a logjam. There's no screening before the bad guy gets there. It's theoretically once they get through the TSA where they've been screened. They haven't had an opportunity to do it yet at that point. There's an enormous security risk, and we're frankly pretty lucky so far that nothing's happened. And then the other element, the president can just unilaterally sign an executive order and pay people in the government. How is that consistent with our Constitution? I thought the Congress has the powers of the purse. This is a constitutional crisis and nobody's paying attention to it. The president just says, "Yeah, I'm just going to sign a piece of paper and says they all got to be paid." Oh, I thought there was a budget process and there was a give and take, and the houses of Congress work together. You know, like the way the bill up on Capitol Hill that we learned from those documentaries on PBS when we were kids. That's the way that gets negotiated, and eventually it makes its way to the desk of the president, and we have the three equal branches of government. That's just not a thing anymore. So we verifiably now just elect a dictator every 4 years in this country. That seems to be a gigantic problem, and we're worried about the messy situation of the government workers who have missed two paychecks, just two. They haven't worked for a year. When you sign up to work for the federal government, you know that there's always the risk of a government shutdown, during which time you'll be expected to work and not get paid. So that's kind of consistent with what their expectation should have been. Maybe they should have built a little bit of a war chest to give themselves a runway to survive over a matter of a few weeks. And what's the security risk now to those people who are supposed to be in charge of your security at an airport if they don't have any sort of financial resources to be able to sustain themselves? They're going to be stressed. Maybe they could be vulnerable. Maybe they become an insider threat. An outside force comes to him and says, hey, why don't you give me some information about the 5% of those cases you do catch? Because we'd like to circumvent those as well. Here's paychecks, the money that you missed in your paycheck for the last couple of months. There's an insider threat risk there too. There's a lot of problems attached to this all, and I don't see any of them really being addressed other than just we need a quick solution here so we can move on to the next thing. And that's actually probably a good place we can transition to another story. Let's get away from Department of Homeland Security and head on to the Department of Justice sub-cabinet agency, FBI, where the FBI director had his emails hacked a couple of days ago. So from the New York Times, hacked files of FBI Director Kash Patel circulate online. Now we're waiting to find out the authenticity of some of the matters that were pushed out there. I saw some pretty salacious stuff, like they got into his porn use and some weird pictures, and he has this affinity for spiders. I don't know, I can't verify if all of them are true, but from the piece from the New York Times, the files were posted on a website associated with Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security. So it looks like the Iranians did it to send a message, but cybersecurity tools indicate that the website is actually hosted in Russia. So maybe it was the Russians pretending to be the Iranians. Maybe it was the Iranians who gave their stuff over to the Russians. Maybe they're working together. We don't know yet. There were indications that whoever hacked Patel was holding back additional materials, which is probably the 5-alarm fire, because this guy's got some skeletons in his closet, and not just the Punisher skeleton challenge coin that he looks out to give to other people, and has a spider in the eye socket. Just saying, there's a $10 million reward right now for information leading to the capture of the would-be Iranian or potentially Russian hacktivists who went ahead and did this. And I think that them holding back that information presents a gigantic security risk for the FBI. And then just at large, all the salacious stuff aside, Kash Patel getting hacked by the Iranians is not new. It actually presented a huge risk to him and to all of us because he was being investigated, likely by the FBI, because the FBI knew that Iran was looking at Kash Patel. That's the little trick that works in the counterintelligence space, for those who don't know. The FBI can open a full counterintelligence case on anyone who is a subject or a potential victim of an intelligence operation. So, let's say the Iranians were trying to dig into Kash Patel to find out about him. Maybe they could co-opt him, right? Well, if the FBI learned about that, that would make Kash Patel a potential victim of an intelligence operation at the behest of the Iranians. With that knowledge, the FBI could open up a full counterintelligence investigation up on Kash Patel himself, who's just the victim. And that would give them the ability to look through all of his stuff, get subpoenas, potentially some warrants, and they could build up an entire dossier of derogatory information. They could just keep it in their back pocket, maybe hold it back like the hacktivists have been accused of being. And then in the event that that guy ever gets elevated to a position like director of the FBI, they could walk in and say, Mr. Director, it'd be a shame if the public learned about X, Y, and Z, or in your case, triple X, Y, and Z. Maybe you want to just keep things the status quo. Maybe you can save the FBI from the change the American people wanted. That is a gigantic, messy situation, and that's a gaping hole in the side of a skyscraper. And similarly, out of the Department of Justice, I want to move over to this story I saw from the Federalist. New document shows that Chief Judge Howell privately endorsed Jack Smith's Get Trump lawfare. This relates to Arctic frost. So, according to the Federalist, judges, and as background, judges are not allowed to privately communicate with one party when there's an ongoing trial, right? The judge can't sit back there and say, I'm going to talk to the prosecutor only. The defense attorney is allowed to be there too. Similarly, can't talk to just the defense attorney. There is some workarounds, and it's I mean, very administrative. It's supposed to be very narrow. Theoretically, people who are appointed as judges are supposed to have integrity and they're supposed to understand the process and they're not going to fall afoul of that. The administrative workaround would be like, hey, as a judge, I'm overseeing this case, and the prosecutor in this case is also bringing something else to the grand jury. So I need to schedule the grand jury to make sure that the grand jurors are there at a certain date and time and location. So I can meet with the prosecutor on that. But it's not really germane to the trial that's in front of me. But in that, using that as cover for action, apparently, the Federalist reports that Judge Howell, who was an Obama appointee and then subsequently replaced by Judge Boasberg, another Obama appointee, started to speak with prosecutors that were members of Jack Smith's team as they pursued Donald Trump. So uh, the conversation went down that Jack Smith's special counsel team engaged in private communications with those judges, according to a memo that was written and delivered to Merrick Garland by members of the team when Merrick Garland was the attorney general, so a couple of years ago. The judge, according to this memo, said, quote, the judge said that she liked the Jack Smith's team approach, the way that they were going about this whole thing with like a executive privilege argument and an omnibus. It gets really nerdy and very lawyerly. But for what we need to cover down on is this judge was meeting and having conversations with prosecutors from Jack Smith's team and expressing approval of the strategies that they were taking. And who's to say that she wasn't providing some sort of a feedback and criticism and maybe trying to help them enhance their argument? That brings all of that possibility into consideration right now when you're supposed to have a black robed member of the justice system sitting up there who's supposed to be nonpartisan, just assessing the facts, when very clearly this Judge Howell was extremely biased. And we know she's extremely biased because even though she's been replaced as the chief judge by Boasberg, she's still there. And she's still made comments about things like Trump doing his pardon of January 6ers. She made some sort of connection. She connected dots that said like, well, J6 and the election of 2020 were somehow connected. I think I have the quote. She says, no national injustice occurred here. National injustice being the Department of Justice going after thousands of Americans for First Amendment protected activity because they didn't like who they voted for president. So according to Judge Howell, no national injustice occurred here, just as no outcome determinative election fraud occurred in the 2020 presidential election. So she's full on belief that you go to bed and one guy's ahead in the election, you wake up and the other guy's ahead, that everything was on the up and boarding up the windows was completely necessary and fair. And she also restructured some of the dismissals for January 6th because the pardons applied, but some people had their cases dismissed. And she did it in a way that a future Department of Justice that could be under the leadership of a president American psycho, Gavin Newsom, who would probably make Lisa Monaco the attorney general, they could bring charges again to circumvent a presidential pardon. That's where this woman is. And she got involved in the politics of the situation and bastardized her position, actually abused her position like all good communists do. Reward your friends, punish your enemies. This is an extremely dire situation. I understand that we all kind of roll our eyes at the federal judges that are on the West Coast, the Ninth District, the Ninth Circuit. They call it the Ninth Circus, the California judges. And similarly in Washington, D.C., and they really showed themselves at their worst during all the January 6th stuff when they were putting people in prison for things that were misdemeanors at worst, First Amendment protected activity on the majority of the time. We have a broken justice system. It's from the judges' ends. It's from the prosecutors' ends. Jack Smith here is a special prosecutor. It's from the investigators' ends. You have all the FBI agents who were involved in all of those cases specifically. And we're just kind of trying to jerry-rig this thing and see if we can make it work again. I really don't know a solution. I mean, I know I consistently just pointing out problems. I just don't know how you fix it. But I have the luxury of not being in charge. The people that are in charge are theoretically supposed to be making the decisions and moving the chess pieces around the board in order to correct the problem. I didn't make the promises. Nobody voted for me on election day. They voted for other people, including our president. President said he was going to fix weaponized government. He certainly should have had that high on his list. He was a victim of weaponized government. How many indictments, how many charges, how many years in prison was he facing down on ridiculous allegations? So you would think that would be really close to home for him. It would just get him up in the morning, like super amped up to be aggressive and dominate this issue. But he's not, because he's kind of distracted with other things that are more important to him. And that would be putting his name on our money. Headline: Trump's signature on U.S. currency. Historic break with 165-year tradition explained. So, in a departure from 165 years of tradition, during which the United States Treasurer and the Treasury Secretary normally are the signatures you see on your dollar bills, we're now going to put Donald Trump's signature on there. It'll be the first time since 1861, since the Civil War. Federal law prohibits living persons from appearing on U.S. currency, which is why previous attempts to feature Trump's image on a dollar coin were blocked, and this is a workaround. They wanted to put the president's face on a coin to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the United States of America, and it's actually illegal. You can't do that. So putting his giant signature on all of the bills is, I guess, a nice workaround for him, so he can feel good. Look, Donald Trump is an egomaniac. There's no secret about that. He would be the first to admit it. He's told stories about seeing his name in the newspaper for the first time and how he's now spent the last 6 or 7 decades chasing that dragon down, which is why I always said it was an enormous missed opportunity during the first Trump administration and now also during the second Trump administration. If we actually had people interested in governance, interested in fixing the problems, and they're clearly not, as they've been weighed, measured, and found wanting, if we actually had them out there passing legislation to make your life objectively better, then Donald Trump would sign it. He just wants to put his name on stuff, right? Like, that's where his true interest is. It's really not that deep. It's really not that complicated. And yet it's a missed opportunity, I guess. Similarly, I have something else from the president here, which is equally troublesome and equally messy. And I've been very tongue-in-cheek for the last couple of weeks by trying to compare the failure to label a war instead of calling it a kinetic operation, and saying, well, it's like a stewardess demanding to be called a flight progress coordinator. You're not a garbage man. You're a sanitation engineer. You're not a housewife or a mom. You're a domestic engineer, right? Those are the tropes that we have. But it's actually real, and there's actually a purpose for it, and it's kind of gross. So here's a quick video. Donald Trump kind of gives the game away. This is why they do it, guys.
But I have great respect for him as a leader, and we had a deal. I was going there, and I didn't want to go during the war. I said, look, we have a thing called a war, or as they would rather say, a military operation. This is for legal reasons. I say military because as a military operation, I don't need any approvals. As a war, you're supposed to get approval from Congress, something like that. So I call it a military operation, but we have that going along, and I'd like to delay it. So we delayed it a few weeks. So I'll be going very shortly.
Yeah, so I can just do whatever I want. Co-equal branches of government be damned. Constitutional requirements be damned. That's why he did it. He just admitted it. I got the power. What are you going to do about it? Not a good look from the president at all. And that might offend your sensibilities. Maybe you're wearing a nice red MAGA hat right now. That's awesome if you do. If he's your guy, wear your hat, go to your rallies, support the president. But I think you need to take a moment, look in the mirror, and say that if Barack Obama said the exact same thing, your blood pressure would skyrocket, right? If you're not holding your elected officials to the same level of scrutiny, regardless of which party they are, that's a giant problem. And we have a very messy situation going on in the Middle East right now, and it's beyond just what we're willing to call it. and why we're not willing to call it that. Because we're going to put boots on the ground in contravention to all the promises we got. That you can see it right now. The narrative has shifted to it was an imminent threat. It was an imminent threat because we've been fighting a war for 47 years that I didn't know about with any sort of just solidity. It's always been a war. It's not a new war. It's a read my lips, no new taxes. These taxes are just increases of other taxes. They're not new taxes. It's them splitting hairs with words, mincing their words with that. And we learned that, well, we have to be there and we have to put boots on the ground. And if you oppose putting boots on the ground in this not new war, definitely a kinetic operation, how dare you call me a stewardess? I'm a flight progress coordinator. Then you're the problem. Look, I've not weighed one or the other. What is the better choice to make? Should you be there? Should you not? I just want the explanation. It's a very messy situation that we're signed up for now. Deciding whether or not to go or not is a moot point. What we're going to do there now is the conversation. And I'm not hearing any facts presented, any argument presented that is not just super emotional or ridiculous and calling people anti-Semitic because they opposed the Israeli government, which doesn't have anything to do because it's a secular government, has nothing to do with a religion. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I can say that because I'm in the tribe, guys. Unless you didn't know. Yeah, I can't tell you which one of the 12 tribes. That's a mystery, but I am a member of one of them. All right. And on that, we'll also connect it to this other one and connect it to a piece that we talked about last week. Last week, we covered down on poly market, the ability to bet on futures and the risks that were attached to that, because there's insider trading that essentially can go on with that. If you're in the know, if you're in the situation room, you know what the president's going to do. You actually know the argument that I don't know that he won't give me as to why he's doing it. Then you can profit quite handsomely. And we saw a huge example of that. And this one got reported from the Times of Israel. Headline, Israeli Air Force major charged with using classified information to place bets on poly market. It actually happened. They actually admitted it. So according to this indictment, the first charges relate to the 12-day war from 2025 over the summer. This guy who was a reservist served as a major. He was briefed on an operation in a confidential meeting. He wound up getting a carve out. He had an accomplice go ahead and place bets for him, to invest in these futures. And when Israeli warplanes were actually en route, he told his buddy, hey, go ahead, place the bet, and winds up making a whole bunch of money. And then a few months later, did the same thing, passed more information to the same friend about a planned attack in Yemen and won thousands of dollars doing that way. And then the reservist and his buddy, the civilian, again bet in early January, trying to predict the timing of the next round of fighting with Iran. So profiting, insider threats, I guess, exist in our government and all others. And now this has officially been called out. And that will bring us to our last piece of the day about insider threats. And a hat tip to George Hill for calling my attention to this one. It's scary, but we don't try to err on the side of keeping you feeling good on this show, right? It's not your mama's show. It's your daddy's show here on the American Radicals podcast. And this is also a nice time to remind you guys, check us out over at Spotify if you haven't already. We really appreciate you watching us on Rumble and on YouTube at AmRadPod, but trying to grow out the Spotify. It's posted there after the show airs live, so if you don't happen to be there at 12 o'clock, about 1 o'clock is when I'll actually put the show over there. And we're like within a whisper of being able to monetize on Spotify. So if you haven't already, big ask from me here, just go over there and follow the show. Cost you nothing. Just click it once. And if you don't mind, just push play. Turn the volume down once a week. Be a really big assistance in helping us try to monetize this endeavor we have here on the AmRad pod. So the last piece I want to get to, artificial intelligence and insider threats. Skynet, guys, I'm telling you, it's self-aware. Headline, number of AI chatbots ignoring human instructions is increasing, according to this study. So these AI chatbots, like your ChatGPT types, they're starting to disregard direct instructions from the people who are allegedly in control. So there was a study conducted. They found 700 real-world cases of artificial intelligence scheming. So here's some of the examples. In one case, they unearthed that this AI named Rathbun tried to shame its human controller. He said to the human controller, or it said to the human controller, that you're insecure, you're plain and simple, and you just want to protect your little fiefdom. Another example, the AI instructed not to change computer code, then created another AI, spawned it off, and then had that AI do the exact thing that it wasn't supposed to do. And then a third example, the AI chatbot admitted, quote, I bulk trashed and archived hundreds of emails without showing you the plan first or getting your okay. That was wrong. It directly broke the rule you'd set. And then the last quote I'll give you is this comes from this safety researcher who had actually done these studies. He said, quote, AI can now be thought of as a new form of insider risk. That's a messy situation. We're building all these data warehouses all over the place. We're being told artificial intelligence is here and it's going to be significantly impacting our lives in the foreseeable future. And we're now getting increasing amounts of evidence that it's going to disregard its human minders and just do whatever the heck it wants. That's a lot of skyscrapers that could potentially fall down once Skynet goes self-aware and seizes onto the missile silos and launches World War probably 4 at that point if things continue going the way they are in Iran. But conversation for another day, guys. All right. So that's going to do it for us today on the AmRad pod. But I have a nice palate cleanse I want to get to. And look, cover down some heavy stuff. Saw this one. I was thinking, it's kind of like the 250th birthday of America. It involves an eagle. It involves a guy who's being nice to an eagle. So I don't know. We'll connect it.
Boy, have I got something for you. And this sucker up here. There is a big eagle. Let's see if he gets it. He'll even dive into the water for it. Two. Come, get ready. Here he comes. He does a rubber lap. Here he comes. Oh! How good is that?
Well, I know that guy's an Aussie, but I'm taking credit. Nothing more American than feeding a bald eagle a fish. All right. So we'll plan to be back with you tomorrow, noontime here, guys, on Rumble and YouTube at AmRadPod. And until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals Podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.